So, there's a quick question from Jared here, who says, what evidence is there that non-renewables are the cheapest sorts of energy? I thought government subsidies are required, or was that just to kickstart the industry? Now, I certainly remember loads of solar power subsidies. In fact, my parents managed to get a chunk of money to put solar power panels on their roof. But has it sort of dramatically fallen in the last sort of 10 years or so?
Yeah, it's been an exponential fall in the cost of solar and wind, actually. I think that was probably the intentions of some of the subsidies. Now, I'm not familiar with what the situation for subsidies is in different countries, but there is a report by one of the big energy agencies, and I can't quite remember who it is, who estimate the average cost across the world of different forms of power. And actually, the cheapest form of power is keeping existing nuclear fission plants open, because if they're already built, it's very cheap to extend their lives. But the cheapest form of new energy is definitely solar and wind at the moment across the world.
And also, I think it's important to what's the word, bear in mind when I was because this was interesting to me, so I was sort of looking it up while you were talking. And actually, it's important to estimate the whole life cycle of your energy that you're producing, and not just sort of every what hour. An hour of running a nuclear power plant is probably not that expensive, but you have to build the thing first, and that's incredibly expensive. Versus, I'd imagine a turbine's a bit cheaper to build. Is that correct? And obviously, you have to kind of factor those fixed costs and the running costs as well.
Yeah. So in fact, so the capital cost of something like a nuclear fission plant can be very big, because up front you have to build this huge facility. Whereas, of course, with something like solar or wind, then you build small units first. But those small units correspondingly generate small amounts of energy.
Sure. So there was also another question about, didn't JET actually, that's the Joint European Torus, actually achieve net energy gain of 67% in 1997? So what's blocked progress since? That sort of doesn't sound so impressive. It's only gained a few percent since then, or has it sort of hit the limit of what it can achieve, and actually this new ITER facility will be the one that will be able to go further than that?
Yeah, so Kate may want to come on this one as well, but JET got pretty close with 67%, which was in 1997. But there were various problems. I mean, one of the things that they wanted to do was change the material on the walls for reasons to do with material science. But I think it was at the limit because of the volume of plasma that JET has. And one of the things that ITER is going to do is increase that by a factor of 10. So that's why people are pretty sure that something like ITER can reach net energy gain. Having said that, JET had control of the plasma for a brief moment, and I think its real problem is just that for energy, as an energy source, it's got to be really reliable, almost continuous operation in a tokamak. So in some ways, I'd say people are in recent times, my sense is that people working on magnetic fusion are as excited about the fact that people have been able to control plasmas for 100 seconds, which is orders of magnitude more than when tokamaks began.
Yeah, I think just to add, as you say, this peak only happened over less than a couple of seconds, right? And that's because there's lots of instabilities, turbulence, and so forth. And that's a very lossy process. Energy loss is what I mean. And to overcome that, you either have to go bigger in terms of ITER, or you up the magnetic field in terms of, like, say, the small devices like the spherical tokamaks, like tokamak energy and so forth. And indeed, STEP in the UK as well, which is another big device that may be built one day by 2040, they're saying. So there's two ways to skin a cat there, but we haven't done either yet. So we're working towards those.
And Kate, maybe you could answer this one as well. Gavin asked, could you have a bit more info on what a stellarator is? And that was a term that I didn't quite catch what that meant. So can either of you explain?
Well, yeah. So in order to confine a plasma in a magnetic device, you have to levitate it inside somehow, right? And so there are two ways to do that. You can either have a combination of what we call the polloidal field coil, which drives a current around the center, combined with toroidal field coils, which end up making a helical magnetic field, and those particles are constrained to follow those helical field lines. So you can either do it that way, or you can twist the device itself And a stellarator is that. So if you like engineering, the stellarator is your boy, right? Because rather than twisting the field lines inside, you twist the device itself. So the magnetic field cores themselves are this beautiful kind of twisted device. The effect is the same, as in you can find the plasma, but actually stellarators, because you're not driving a current in there, are less subject to the type of instabilities that come from those current-driven kind of instabilities. So there's pros and cons, but that's why I think Arthur is pretty excited about stellarators. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, no, you've said it already. The engineering is absolutely crazy, and they are more resilient to some types of instability, which is great news, because that's one of the things that holds back how long the plasma in a tokamak can stay together before it kind of rips itself apart because of those naughty plasmas. But Kate, am I right in saying that the reason why we need this helical field, or the reason why we need to twist the magnetic field, is so the particles don't spend too long on either side of the machine? Yeah. Because what happens is that the charged particles, if you've got a magnetic field in the center like this, and a particle is on the outside, it feels less magnetic field than on the inside. And the nice thing about a helical magnetic field that the particles are following is that they'll spend as much time on the outside as the inside, rather than just going round in the same loop. But the stellarator does the same thing, but as Kate said, with a twist. So to answer the question, a stellarator is a tokamak with a twist.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Excellent way of putting it. George asks, because you're also an economist as well as a plasma physicist, do you think that in the future fusion would allow the UK to become energy independent? I mean, some people might know there's a big cable that goes from the UK to France, where we import quite a bit of our electricity, especially during the winter, I think. Isn't it mostly from like French nuclear fission stations, actually, is where we sort of top up our energy in the winter?
Most of France's energy is from fission. So anything we're buying from there is probably a good deal of it has come from fission, effectively. Yeah, that's a really good question. So it's really interesting what's happened in the UK at the moment, which is it just hasn't been very windy. So we've had to buy a load more energy, and then the cable went down as well. So it's been a bit of a tricky situation. Fortunately, the lights are all on, and you can still hear me. I think if fusion works and we can get reactors based on that, then the UK does have a chance of becoming energy independent. Now, that's not to say that that's necessarily the right goal or not, but it just could do if it wanted to.
And actually, if I'm right, isn't it true that actually we had to switch on some coal-fired power stations recently and bring them out of retirement just to kind of stop the lights from going off? And of course, that is many times worse for the climate and many times more expensive. So, if we could have that sort of background sustaining power of fusion, that would be a lot better. And to add to that, Reese asks, in an ideal world, what would the energy mix look like? What would you sort of envisage in the year 3000?
Well, speaking with my economics hat on, it would be the mix that gives us the best kind of mix of resilience and cost. We want to make energy cheap for people because people have lots of exciting things to spend their money on. They don't want to spend it all on their energy bills. But we also need an energy source that's going to be reliable and work for us, and provide baseload power as well as other things. So I think it will depend how good batteries are, how much we can smooth over variation in renewables, and how much better we are at energy efficiency, and how much things like fusion, fission, and renewables ultimately end up costing. The whole life cycle costs, as you mentioned earlier.
And that's just to add to that, I know we already do this. We're talking about improvements in battery technology, but I believe in Scotland and maybe some other places around the world, they just use water, and you can just use any excess energy. You get the water, you pump it up a big hill, and then when you need that energy back, you can just let the water go and drive a turbine. Surely you could just store huge amounts of energy that way. Why is that not a fine? No, I mean obviously we can't, and that's why we need new batteries.
We have one of those. We definitely have those in the UK. I mean, there's a famous one called Electric Mountain, which I believe is in Wales, but I apologise to people if I've got that wrong. And I won't try and pronounce it. And it's it's amazing because it's a kind of energy thing that has a its energy efficiency is negative in the sense that you put in 100% energy and you get somewhat less out because it allows you to store the energy. So it is an energy store, and I think the amount of power that it can provide in the short run, and I'm thinking back years here, so I'm sorry if this isn't wrong, if this isn't right. I think it's on the order of hours. So as one of the star builders said, when I was speaking to them, this was actually someone from one of the private firms, batteries that turn the day into night are feasible, but kind of turning the summer into the winter and vice versa looks like a bit of a stretch based on what we've been able to achieve to date.
Yeah, lighting is a lot less energy intensive than heating, isn't it? So that's anyway. So Ollie asked, obviously, we all know what your number one book recommendation would be on the subject of nuclear fusion, but are there any other books that you read during the course of your research for this book, or any other books you'd recommend people read if they want to get a bit deeper into the world of fusion power?
Well, I read an awful lot of plasma physics and fusion books, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend to people. But for those who do like the physics, then there's a great textbook by Etzini about inertial confinement fusion. Every plasma physicist has something called the NRL plasma formulary, which is a pretty dry read as well. Mine's in tatters. I'm sure Kate's is too.
It is, but I've got a new one. So,
which is a great read for plasma physicists. Beyond that, in terms of books, one of the books that I found really useful to read, actually, just because of its kind of scope and because I was kind of looking into the history of all things nuclear, was Richard Rhodes' The Making of the Atomic Bomb, which is a real classic read. In terms of ones, I'm just looking at my shelf up here to see what else I actually did read. So 15 Million Degrees by Lucy Green, which is about the sun. Is a great one, and I'm sure you've had her in. And
we've got a talk from Lucy Green on that book, in fact, on our YouTube channel, I'm pretty sure. So if you just go, just like type in Lucy Green Royal Institution YouTube, you should be able to find that talk. If you don't want to shell out for the book, but watch the talk and then get the book afterwards would be my advice.
And one of the other ones that I enjoyed is a book called A Piece of the Sun by Daniel Cleary, which is also about fusion. It's from a few years ago now, but Daniel Cleary is a great science writer, and he often writes about fusion. I think he writes for Science or Nature, one of those. But check out his articles as well.
Science, yeah.
Fantastic. Kate, I don't know if you had any other recommendations of things for people to read.
Yeah. Do you know, it's terrible because I don't tend to read science books, like popular science books, because it's kind of busman's holiday, isn't it?
Yeah.
But no.
That's okay. We can move on.
I don't. Yeah,
hey,
I think
that was the perfect opportunity for you to say the Star Builders. And
I've heard
there's
of
an
this
open goal
amazing
there.
book that's written by Arthur Turrell. Yeah, you should definitely.
Arthur had to write it to fill this gap in the market. You see, that's why.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I'll just say, obviously, you can watch Kate's talk. Her discourse is also on our YouTube channel, so do go and check that out as well. George asks, do you think fusion reactors will become successful through private startups or actually through large government-funded schemes? Or do you think, what do you think will end up being the sort of primary way? And I guess my sort of supplementary follow-up question to that is the current model of having a very big power station, miles from anywhere, generating lots of power for 10 cities or 5 cities or whatever, or could there be smaller community generation, and might that be a better way of distributing power?
Great questions. Kate, would you like to go first? I'm happy to.
First bit. So I think obviously we have to be careful in the world of fusion, because one has to promise something in order to get people to invest, which is either public money and or private money, right? So it's a fine balance between bombast and actually what you're going to deliver, right? So we walk that tightrope no matter what sector you're in every day.
Yeah.
Obviously, the sort of publicly funded stuff has been around for longer, has been, in all of the pitfalls. But big fusion takes a long time. The bit of paper that was signed that said we're going to do something like ITER was 80-something by Gorbachev and Reagan. I was a child, right? And it takes a long time because you have to get, ITER is a global project. It takes many countries around the world to invest and build this thing like a Terry's chocolate orange. And that it's going to work is going to be an incredible feat of collaboration. And, it's a big device, right? So in some senses, if you can do it smaller and more agile, like these sort of private companies, but it's more risky to some extent because it's based on sort of very new technology, very new things like superconducting magnets and stuff like that, which, it is a sort of unknown quantity to a certain extent. So I think I'm really excited regardless. I just want fusion to work. So I kind of don't really care who does it, as long as it's done and that it's done well and it's done equitably. That's the main thing. And I think that's one of the advantages to ITER, because it is a global project. Everybody has a slice of the IP pie, which I feel quite comfortable with. So, but I don't know if you want to add to that on.
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think, look, the private and public sectors are good at different things. So the public sector is very good at supporting things in the early days where, things might not work. But, because there's a chance of delivering some real public benefits in the long run, which is the nature of research, then, they're willing to take that risk and see where it goes. And public investment in fusion has, I showed you those, the improvement that we've had since 1958. Most of that's been public investment in fusion, and it's led to extraordinary progress and progress on understanding that no private fusion firm would ever have had the appetite for. Now, the public sector is not brilliant at everything. With my economics hat on, markets are really good at some things. They're really good at making things cheap and standardized and, innovating on things like cost, which is not nothing, making something roll out across the whole world is a really difficult thing to do, logistically and, cost-wise and all of that stuff. So, to kind of come to an answer, I think the best hope for fusion is a combination of public and private. And as a kind of concrete example of that, some of what the US has been doing has been really interesting. So the Department of Energy in the US has been setting out these milestone funding programs where they say, well, sure, we'll put some public money into private fusion, but what we'll do is say you must reach these milestones if you want the funding to continue. And that's making sure that, it helps with that risk of overpromising because they have to reach these milestones. But it also ensures that we explore this full space of possible ideas. But I think ultimately, when fusion becomes a kind of reality and can be plugged into the grid, I expect, like with other forms of power, the private sector will probably play a large role, just as it's doing with renewables at the moment. And your other question, Martin, which is really interesting and a very good one on modularity. Yeah, we know there's a lot of research out there that says the more modular you can make things, the easier it is to improve them and innovate. And, we see this with semiconductor chips. We see it with energy efficiency and in lots of other products as well. And one of the problems I think that nuclear fission has had is it has these huge monolithic reactors that take a really long time to build and have payoffs over decades, even if they're really reliable and actually turns out very safe when you look at the data form of energy. But people just have much more appetite for something smaller. So I think if one of the private sector fusion firms or the public investment laboratories can crack doing fusion at a smaller scale, which is going to make it cheaper to set up plants, then that is going to be transformative for the likelihood of fusion becoming a big part of our energy supply in the future.
Fantastic. I mean, just as you were talking there about the public-private sector, to me, it sounds very analogous to the way the space sector is going, in the sense that there was a lot of big investment, in the early days, but now more and more private sectors, starting to take over bits where it can sort of provide improvement. So it does seem to be very similar. I guess here's my own question: will we have a working fusion reactor before we have somebody on Mars?
Those are both very difficult to judge, and I don't know anything about going to Mars.
It's just, I guess, just the comparison between the public and private sector. Will that will that first nuclear reactor be a public or a private one? And indeed, will the first person on Mars be a private citizen or a we don't know, I guess.
I hate making predictions, especially if they're about the future.
Yeah, the worst.
And what I'd say though is that one of those two things is going to be a lot more useful to humanity in the short run, at least.
Oof. I'll leave it there. Just a few quick questions. I notice we're kind of running out of time, but there's still some really good questions. So I'll just throw a few more at you. You probably hear this quite a lot, both of you, but I just thought I'd get it out there. Cold fusion. That was just a load of nonsense, right? There's been no progress on it. It's not really a thing. It's never been proven to work. Is that right?
Yes. Next question.
Okay, great to know.
I think that's true. It did turn out to be not. It depends. There have been various different cold fusion furores. Some of them were just plain bad science. People just got the science wrong. And look, this stuff is complicated. And even at the time, one of the most famous star builders, phoned up to congratulate some of the people involved in one of the experiments and say, well done, you've nailed it, because it seemed kind of plausible. So even the experts get taken in, and fusion's so hard, it's hard to diagnose temperatures when they're at millions of degrees. Can't use a thermometer, even a very long one. It's too hot. So I can see how, messages get confused, and it requires a lot of knowledge. But all the cold fusion schemes to date haven't come to anything, and the science is bad. So if someone tells you that's what they're doing, they're wrong.
Just a quick question that I think might help clarify for a few people watching. Kin Yang asks, why do we actually need deuterium and tritium? Why can't we just use ordinary hydrogen? Because there's loads more of it, and it's easier and it's cheap. So why do we need to bother?
That's a great question. So as I said, the fusion is difficult to do because you've got to force these positively charged particles together. And the chances, even if you get the energy right, of them fusing is actually pretty low. But what's nice about deuterium and tritium is it's got the highest chance of happening of any fusion fuel that we can lay our hands on. So if we did other types of fusion reaction, we'd need much more extreme conditions. And as you know, we're struggling with these conditions. And in fact, there's some people would like to do proton-boron fusion because it doesn't produce neutrons. So it's attractive in that respect because neutrons have some problems like activating the reactor chamber. But proton-boron, I think, needs temperatures about 10 times as high as deuterium, tritium. So we're choosing deuterium and tritium to make life easy on ourselves, it turns out.
Ben was actually sort of following up on this idea of sort of modularity in smaller versions of fusion. He says, could you ever in principle have a miniature fusion reactor like in a pacemaker or something like that? Because I know we're kind of used to slightly nuclear batteries in these sort of things that need to last a long time, but that's just going to be too hot and crazy to put it inside you.
I think that happened in Iron Man, actually. Something like that. Though I don't think they described it as a pacemaker. That would have made it seem a bit less exciting, perhaps. Everything that we know about fusion so far suggests scale is important. When we look at where fusion has worked successfully, whether it's in stars or in tokamaks or in laser fusion, scale seems to be important. So it's not impossible, but experience and actually the maths sometimes as well, partly because of the confinement, suggests we need scale. But Kate, I'm sure you've got a good take on this as well.
I think that was a succinct way of saying it, because ultimately, the plasmas that we make in the NIF are smaller than a ball bearing, but you have to drive them, you have to get energy in, and so you need football stadium size, drivers to do that. So this is the thing, that what you need to do in order to heat it to this 150 million degrees is the bit that makes it big to a certain extent, isn't it?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's we're already slightly over time, and still quite a few questions I was going to get through. So sorry to everyone that I didn't quite get round to your question. Just a few things to say before we disappear. Just a quick reminder that anyone in the world is welcome to join the Royal Institution as a member. You don't need to be nominated. There's no qualification. You just need to like science, like what we do, and want to support us. You can join a membership that extends back all the way to Michael Faraday and Carl Sagan and all the cool people. and me. So, you can join us. So do check that out, ragb.org/membership. Or, of course, you can drop us a donation via the Just Giving link in the chat as well if you've enjoyed the talk. Just before we go, we've had someone in the chat just ask if they want to find out more or get in contact with you, Arthur. What's the best place for them to go? I believe you've got a website.
I have got a website, and I think it's arthurturrell.com, but it might be aeturrell.com. If you stick my name into Google, I'm sure I will come up. And there's links to the book there as well.
Fantastic. And Kate, I believe you already put your email address in the chat, but if people want to find out more about you and your work.
If you Google me, my university web address will come up anyway, and my email is on there. So it's not a secret. So do feel free to drop me a line. That's totally fine. Or you can see me on Twitter if you like as well.
Also on Twitter.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much to both of you. And just want to say, Arthur, just real congratulations that throughout your talk, you doggedly didn't use the term nuclear scientist, nuclear engineer, physicist, or anything like that. You really hammered home the title of the book every time. So that was brilliant marketing. Well done. I thought you did a great job of reminding people of.
Out, Martin. That's the thing,
so there you go.
There's all these different disciplines involved now. Entrepreneurs. So it's a bit easier to say the Star Builders.
It's a good catch-all term, I think, and a good reminder of people of the title of the book, The Star Builders, which you can get from all good bookshops and Amazon as well. So do check that out. But that just about wraps it up for this talk tonight. So thank you all for joining us. Thanks to Arthur and Kate, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thanks. See ya.